All right, welcome out. Here we are, moving along, chapter 9. We're getting there. All right. So we set the foundation, a little bit of a review for you. Set the foundation about fair-minded thinking, right? What is thinking, fair-minded thinking, as opposed to um, restrictive thinking, false thinking, poor thinking, anything that has to do with manipulation, right? We don't want that. Then they talked about the first four stages of development. There's two more stages, which will be spoken about later. There's a bunch of other stuff that had to be gotten to before we get there. But anyways, there's that. So we looked at the foundation, define what it is that we need to be, right? And then look at where we are, chapter 2, and then look outside ourselves, right? Understanding in the complex world, right? And then we go back in to the self. We look at the parts of thinking, standards of thinking, questions that lead to good thinking, master the thinking, master the content, discover how the best thinkers learn. So that is all critical thinking stuff there, specifically critical thinking. And this is generally how anything is written. First of all, you've got a title. Here it's critical thinking, right? And then there's a subtitle to that. There's the noun and then the verb. The verb subtitle gives you specifics on what about critical thinking. And this is geared towards the student, as we said before, right? So that's the title. Then you have the introduction. This is kind of introductory stuff. It kind of sets up the background, sets the tone. Take a look at, what do we need to know foundationally, right? And that's the first couple, three chapters. And then you get into the thinking. So this is the developmental section, all about thinking. Today we're talking about redefine grades as levels of thinking and learning, right? And as you can see, the developmental section goes on about in regards to thinking as regards decisions, problem solving, argumentative theory, which is the developmental form that is most useful and probably of greatest merit, greatest importance, because we're often, if not, I don't want to say always, but often dealing with argumentation in some form. I want a job. Why should I get it? Give you a job, argue it out, explain yourself. I want a raise. Why should I give you a raise? I want to buy a car. Why should I buy a car? You're talking to yourself in that case, right? A lot of political decisions, very argument based, right? And I'm not just talking about screaming, right? That's not the point, right? Um, so then it goes on with fallacies. That's very important. Strategic thinking. There's a couple of chapters, and strategy or strategic thinking is tied into argumentative thinking, argumentation, logic, reasoning, and there's a lot of that you will use in life, right? In making most decisions, finding a partner, buying a home, starting a career, building a career, sustaining a career, making any purchase, making any political vote. What do we got? Midterms coming up, California here, right? So all that stuff. Anyways, so uh, the best learners, again, that phrase comes up often, does it not? Right? Like the best thinkers, continually assess their learning against standards of excellence. Being passionate about learning, they welcome standards they can use to strive for excellence. That's a key phrase, being passionate. All right. Unless you plan out how you're going to learn, what you're going to learn, why you're going to learn, there will be no passion. And passion is the juice or the fuel that provides the spark that enables learning, best learning, optimized learning, right? Continual learning, building in regards to learning. You're constantly building on what you know and adding to it, right? Since we're all ignorant in our infinite ignorance, we're all equal, sorry. We're all equal in our infinite ignorance. Uh, that should go without saying, right? We're always building. The best learners are not dependent on instructors. There you go. I tell my students that you should be a guru of you. You should be able to teach yourself eventually. At some point, you will hopefully not need classes. In most cases, not extensively, at least we'll say. But you should be able to teach yourself, right? And maintain that teaching of oneself. They have universal criteria that they apply across all dimensions of learning. The extent that you need instructors to tell you how well you're doing and have no independent sense of this yourself, you are not thinking critically. Students who ask me for a grade, I go, well, I give you all you need to know, right? If it's a quiz or a test or a paper or an exercise, there's always base points, right? So you add up your base points and you divide that into the total points that you've acquired or earned by doing those assignments or a certain portion of assignments. You can always tell where you are very accurately by using that methodology. And occasionally, I'm sure there's some intangibles that professors use in their classes, maybe participation. I really don't use that, or attendance, little things like that. But generally, even if they do use those items in determining a grade, the majority of it should be based on your tests and quizzes and exercises. Right? In short, the best learners avoid being overly dependent, that's the key phrase, overly, on teachers, and rather seek to develop an autonomous, disciplined thinking mind. Right? Once I did that, I was in and out of college a couple times, but when I finally went back, I became a much better student. I was going to say 100 times, 1,000 times better, but that's debatable. But anyways, I did become a much more impactful learner, one of greater depth and breadth. I was looking at things through a point of view or a prism of perception, my goals, right? What I wanted to learn, needed to learn. And that made all the difference in the world. Once I started to live my life, I don't want to just say about education. Once I started to live my life from that perspective, my whole world, your whole world will change. Right? Each step in learning, like the process of thinking critically, is tied to self-reflective step of self-assessment. There you go. And I can remember way back when I was like maybe 12 or 13, I used to grab books, mostly fiction. And, then I got into nonfiction, probably late 20s, and I've never really gone back to fiction. But I used to read books, and I used to want to learn, build a vocabulary. I wanted to learn words. So what I would do is I devised it myself. I don't remember hearing anybody suggest it. But I take a paper, 8.5 by 11 line paper, put words on there and their definition, and then just go over them again, again, and again, right? Until I could look at all the words and give definitions verbatim, very easily, very readily. Then I would crumble up that paper, write up another paper, build another vocabulary list. And then I don't know how many times I've done it, dozens of times, right? Then you get to a saturation point, you go, oh, I think I've got a pretty solid vocabulary, right? So I stopped doing that. But I still look up words, even words I know or have known for some time. Because after a while, you forget. And it's just to remind me what's the specific definition. So I'm not thinking upon vague lines or inaccurate lines by imagining I know the definition, right? As a skilled learner, you do not simply have goals in learning. You know what your goals are. Your primary goal is to think within the logic of the subject. And we talked about that already in the previous chapter, right? What is the logic of the subject? What is the point of the subject? The main point or points that the text or the teacher or the course is trying to teach you. And if you don't know that, then you're not really learning. Your learning will be superficial. You probably get a good grade. Just memorize whatever you needed to memorize, for grade, for test, or quiz, or whatever. And then forget all of it shortly after. So, but that's not learning. That's passing classes, getting grades, and that's about it. Your primary goal is to think within the logic of the subject, to think like a scientist, a psychologist, an artist, and so forth, right? Whatever. The best learners seek to enter the foundations of any subject they study and use that foundation to understand everything. Highlight that. Understand everything else within the subject. He put that. Sorry. Understand. That's the key phrase there. Right? But understand everything else within the subject. They seek to understand the most fundamental questions. See the phrases that I'm highlighting? Right. Asked within the subject. They seek to identify the most basic kinds of information used by professionals within the field, most basic concepts the field employs, most fundamental assumptions that underlie it, the most basic point of view that defines it, right? So that's your big picture stuff, right? Develop strategies for self-assessment. I think I told you before that I decided to, for my own interest, sure, but also since I've been working in the field of higher education for quite some time. What is all this learning? What are all these disciplines and all these genres about? Which ones are the most important or have the greatest impact upon society, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, financially, economically, right? So I did that. I took about 10, 12 years and studied a good dozen, through a handful of books, a good dozen disciplines like math and science and economics and philosophy and theology and several others, right? Ethics and so forth. It gives you a pretty good, again, it's a basic kind of introductory look into those issues and topics. I am no expert by any stretch of the imagination in any of them, but I know enough to know why those subjects are being studied, what makes them important, what makes them tick, what they're about, right? I've talked about this before. Develop strategies for self-assessment. In Chapter 5, you are introduced to a host of universal intellectual standards you should now be using to assess your thinking in an independent, assess your thinking independent of what you are thinking about, right? That should be, let's do there. Here we look at more holistic standards for assessing your learning within subjects, virtually. And if you don't know what certain words mean, like holistic, you can kind of tell the whole thing, right? Holistic health, right? Anytime you don't know a word, look it up. First, try to figure it out, like I just did, from the root of the word. That's usually what's up there, right? Anyways, virtually every day, and I'm not going to tell you, right? So you have to look at it. Virtually every day of study, for example, you should seek to assess the quality of your work as learned. But you should go further. You should regularly examine your learning to determine the extent to which you are constructing in your mind the system that defines the subject or subject you are studying, right? I think we can finish that out. I'm going to do a different color, right? Because this is, regularly examine is a key phrase, right? Regularly examine what? You're learning, right? What exactly am I building in my mind? What's the system? Do I know? Do I have a clear picture in my mind? And this is great learning, not just for learning about what individual courses or texts are about, but it's also essential. It's an essential skill to be used in your personal life, on the job, building a career, in a place of employment, maybe in making political decisions, socio-political decisions, or economic decisions. Performance profiles for 5 levels of quality and thinking and learning are what? Exemplary student. So here it is. So as anything, in order to really understand something, you have to put specific labels or definitions to it, right? Like President of the United States. I want to vote for a President of the United States. You ever look at the job qualification or requirements? Most people don't. They say about the current guy, well, he's just a business person. Well, if you're going to be the president, then you probably have to know some business related information, topics. You have to know about finance. You have to know about economics, the free markets. You have to know about banking, trade, taxation. That's all very pertinent to a president's responsibility, who works in conjunction with the Congress, who they control the purse strings, right? Often Congress is borrowing money, right, to do certain things for people, national usually, some local programs, but mostly national programs. It might be like unemployment or WIC or building of roads or train tracks, whatever, right? Those loans, the money that the government borrows to do stuff that individual companies or states or individuals themselves can't do, right? And then the taxpayer is sent the bill to the tax burden, right? So sure, president has to know that. They probably have to have some community organizing skills, right? Obama had those. He was pretty good at that, but he didn't have a lot of real life experience. Didn't build a company or know much firsthand about those things that I spoke about initially, right? So those are some of the basic core. Also, to have some understanding of what's going on internationally, right? Being an international attaché, someone who understands to a degree, because you always have your advisors and you always have specialists, like in the military and those in your cabinet and others who can help you with the details, but nevertheless, you should kind of know the bigger picture of what's going on, what's going on with this country in Latin America, countries or countries in the Middle East or Europe or whatever, right? So that's kind of some of the basic requirements. There's a few more in there, but that's kind of some of the basic requirements for a president. So how many people can even talk about that? If you can't even talk about that, then hold your vote. Anyways, what is a president? What are the requirements of a president? What are the requirements of good thinking, quality and thinking and learning for a student? Exemplary student, high performing student, mixed quality student, low performing student, and last, incompetent student. So again, here we've got the levels, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Usually seems to be 4, 5, or 6 categories or levels or tiers in any of these lists, right? Or breakdown of concepts. Your thinking stands at one of these levels in every class you take and can be shown as such if we have adequate documentation of your thinking on the tests and assignments in the class. Most students have no sense, this is true, I can tell you from 26 years of teaching, have no sense that these levels of performance exist, even though these profiles are based on common denominator academic values. You should get into the habit of reviewing your work with these criteria in mind. And I've done this with my students. Where are you as a thinker in regards to critical thinking? Uh, no experience, never use it, never even thought about it. I'm aware of it, but I really don't use it. I'm aware of it. I use a little bit, or I'm aware of it. I use a little bit more than the previous level, or I'm very aware of it. Worked it out, continuing to work it out. I'm probably a step or two away from top level, top tier critical thinker, right? So you should know that. I mean, if you don't know what it is and you don't know where you are on what that scale is or what that scale defines, how can you do anything? How can you move up? How can you move forward? How can you get an education? Right? How can you learn? You got to know what it is, what defines the various levels of understanding or learning, and then build accordingly, right? Reviewing your work with these criteria in mind. If you do so, you will grow. There's the key word, right? Well, that's the key phrase, right? And that's what you want to do, right? Grow as a learner and thinker. There you go. If you learn how to routinely perform at the high performing or exemplary level, you will do well in every class you take. Pretty simple, but most students don't know. They don't think about it. They don't care. They're not of that mindset yet, right? They're not there yet. Maybe they have to take a few shots, uh, take a shot, fail, drop out, take another shot at it. Sometimes it's just, experience, the experience of failure. And then at some point, hopefully, not always, but hopefully you get motivated, right? So this is talking about, there's some profiles coming up, right? Notice that you can take any statement in the criteria. For example, the statement that the exemplary student often raises important questions and issues, right? So this is good. The exemplary student does what? Often raises important questions and issues, analyzes key questions and problems clearly and precisely, recognizes key question assumptions, clarifies key concepts effectively, uses language in keeping with educated usage, frequently identifies relevant competing points, demonstrates a commitment to reasoning carefully from clearly stated premise and subject, as well as marked sensitivity to important implications and consequences, right? So there's a lot there to unpack, right? And again, focus on the key phrases, right? Raises important questions, analyze key questions, uh, clarifies key concepts, identifies relevant competing points, demonstrates a commitment to reasoning, right? So don't try to, you can, I guess, but you don't necessarily have to memorize the entire complete statement, right? I would focus more on key phrases. To what extent do I raise important questions, issues in the class? So now you're self-checking, right? Analyze key questions, problems clearly and precisely. Recognize key assumptions. So that's this stuff here in question form. Use language in keeping with educated usage. Identify competing points of view. Reason carefully from clearly stated premises. Note important implications and consequences. Right? So we'll take a look at um, these. Not going to go over everything in their entirety. Maybe we'll just do A and B since that's where you want to be. Exemplary performance in thinking within academic subject implies excellence in thinking within a subject, right? Sound historical thinking, biological, mathematical, right? So that's also involves developing a range of knowledge acquired through exercising thinking skills and abilities, right? So it's developing a range of knowledge, right? acquired through exercising thinking skills and doing exemplary work. These should look familiar. On the whole, is clear, precise, well-reasoned, as well as insightful, well-informed. Basic terms and distinctions, as I mentioned previously. Learned at a level implying insight into basic concepts. The exemplary student has internalized the basic intellectual standards appropriate to the assessment of his or her own work in a subject and is highly skilled at self-evaluation, right? So again, to reiterate, to restate, raise important question issues, analyze key questions, problems, recognize questionable assumptions, clarify key concepts, use language, keeping with educated usage, right? So that whole list of things again, right? And then you go down. I'm just going to take a quick look at this, and you can, this one, look at raise. This one often, and then I'm sure C is left often, and D is rarely, and F is not at all, right? So same thing here, and then it's just going to qualify these by grades, Grade, what is the grade? You know how a grade, when you talk about a road, what is the grade? What does the grade look like? Well, it's about a 40 degree, 30, 20 degree dip, goes down here. So if you go up a grade, that's what it is. You're going up a hill, right? And a grade goes up one way, goes down the other way. So what is the grade that you move, or what is defining the movement along that grade, up or down, right? Or those grades up or down. Here's D and F, right? Low performance. Rarely raises, see the wording here. Sometimes raises, rarely. I would say, oh, that's D, right? Rarely raises. F is probably not at all. Just don't care. Forget it. That type of thing. Apply student profiles to assess your performance within subjects. So this is really getting into the specifics of what you would do as a student within your discipline and within a course. So is it really adding to the knowledge about critical thinking? Not really. This is more of an application. How do you apply that critical thinking stuff to a grade assessment, all right? Apply student profiles to assess your performance within subjects. So what was the other one? Okay. So this was use profiles to assess your performance, right? Key point. Profiles to assess your performance, right? See what I'm doing? So I'm moving on to the next topic, but I want to make sure that I align it with what I've already read, right? So now, what does this say? Apply student profiles to assess within subjects, right? Your performance, but your performance within subjects, right? Notice that? Yeah. So this is a general user profile to assess your performance. And then you've got, now you're taking it, you're going inward, you're getting a little more specific, right? So actually there's not a lot here where we need to go over. This is basically what you would use when you're taking courses or beginning your curriculum. Right? As a thinker, developing your ability to apply knowledge to new situations, that's a key point. Because if you learn enough, if you encounter enough new situations, you get practice. It's all practice, right? If you use it enough, if you practice enough in as wide a range of applications as possible, you keep building upon that wider and wider range, your ability to use the tool or tools in general will expand, right? And that's certainly happened with me. Your best teachers and thinkers and doers and movers and shakers got that down pat, right? So if you want to be there, this is the stuff to use, right? As a thinker, developing your ability to apply knowledge to situations, you can apply the skill levels you have been learning in this chapter to any subject you study, right? And you can kind of apply this to almost any area of life as well. You know, how am I doing on my job? What is a low level accomplisher? What is a mid tier, upper tier on my job? Or how about somebody that I'm working with? Or maybe I want to look at or analyze, um, I don't know, a future job, right? Or maybe I want to look at or analyze, now we got midterms coming up, look at or analyze those who are working at a maximum level uh, to represent you at the city, state, local, national level, right? So these skills are very systemic and transferable, right? Yeah. So, oops, there it is. Exemplary thinking as a student of psychology. So again, it's just going over, giving you examples here. And in this case, exemplary thinking as a student, right? In various disciplines, right? So what is that? And we'll take a look at maybe one, maybe two. Exemplary thinking in student psychology demonstrates real achievement in grasping what psychological thinking is, along with a clear development of a range of specific psychological thinking skills and abilities, right? Let me see. I'm not much of my initial major was psychology. Oh, it's just going through the various levels. Yeah. Again, these are just examples. It's not adding any new information. So this chapter is relatively straightforward, right? To be a skilled learner, you must be a skilled thinker. To learn most effectively in the context of college, you must take charge. That one's always important, right? If you don't take charge of life, life will take charge of you. How many times have you heard that one? Right? You must design it. Yeah, you. Hey, you. I'm talking to you, right? You. So, and I tell my students, sure, you're majoring in accounting and psychology and whatever, but have you designed what your uh, education should be? Take a look at the courses. You have a choice of courses to take. You're not restricted to just one limited list or items in your list, right? So you really, and you don't do that in high school. High school, you just go from one, a little bit, I guess you do it. What language do you want? Well, what else can you choose? Oh, yeah, whether or not you can take uh, harder math or science courses, whatever. Right? But it's limited. In college, it's much more open, right? Because that's where things really begin to take off educationally. You become big pants people, very responsible for your learning. So you must design it. I designed mine from the outset. I really, really, really knew what I was doing. Even before I started taking the first college class. This is after I'd been in college, in and out of college a few times, and then older, much more experience and awareness and purposefulness, right? Not just floating or guessing or hoping, right? I designed what I was going to do. Not 100% all the way, but you have to have a pretty good uh, understanding of what it is that you want to learn, what your goal or goals are in learning, and why you're going to learn that stuff and move forward. Right? How you got to apply it because things do change. Nothing works out 100% according to plan. Right? Ask anybody. Right? So you do have to modify things as you go. So put that in, include that concept or idea in your planning. Right? You must design it, plan it out. You plan learning by becoming clear as to what your goals are, what questions you have to or want to answer. So this is good, this whole thing. You plan learning by becoming clear as to what your goals are, what questions you have to or want to answer, what information you need to acquire, what concepts you need to learn, what you need to focus on, how you need to understand it, right? All that stuff. In this chapter, we've laid out profiles you can use throughout your college experience. So this chapter is more, yeah, there are some things that you're learning and adding to your existing understanding of critical thinking. But this is more of a tool. This is like a tool chapter, right? Rather than a conceptual chapter, even though it has concepts in it. But it's more of a tool than conceptual. The first few chapters, definitely conceptual, right? Almost 100%. But anyways, we're learning more and more about critical thinking, and as more and more of that critical thinking is learned, each chapter, successive or subsequent chapter, is going to get more and more into application or applying, as it should, right? That's how courses work. Well, they should work that way. There are a few exceptions, but most work that way. In this chapter, we've laid out profiles you can use throughout your college experience to assess how well you are functioning as a learner in each class, within each academic subject you study. With these profiles clearly in mind, you become the master there is. And that's what mastering is. That's why people get a master's. They're not masters, but I would say if you get your master's, you're beginning. You're at the first level of mastering, right? At least you understand what it is to master, or what you need to do, right? You're at the lower tier, probably second level, right? And you got like another four levels to go to master, which to begin to infringe upon mastering, right? That takes some time, work, and experience. You realize that your ability to think within a subject is determined by the skills you develop in thinking through the subject. Yeah, not by a grade the instructor gives you. Oh, that's cold. But time and time and time again, students will focus on the grade, no matter how many times I say this, no matter how many times I mention it, no matter how many times I drill it home. Maybe someday it'll get seep into their brain. Maybe it never will. I don't know. I can only do what I can do. Simply, you take command of your learning. You know how well you are doing in thinking through its content because you can access your own development. There was speaking of critical thinking, applying critical thinking to real life. This is kind of the candy store of life because of social media. People love to get on social media and talk about relatively insignificant things that are never going to come up in life or rarely ever come up in life again. And they just spend all kinds of time and money and effort arguing about doing it in an idiotic, pointless fashion. But anyways, there was an article about a mom who allowed a son to have an e-bike, one of those electric bikes, and what kids do is they jack it up. It goes maybe 25, 30, but they take the governor off. The governor is the thing that kind of controls the high top end speed, and then they kind of like beef it up. They'll put bigger engine on there or something. I don't know, turbocharge it, and before you know it, they're going like 80 miles an hour on a little e-scooter. Not a bike, e-scooter. And this one kid hit an elderly person, a substitute teacher, 81-year-old guy, walking home from his work, and he died a week later from complications. So they didn't indict the kid, but the mom for allowing him to have that e-bike or e-scooter, I should say. And everybody's arguing in the comments. And one guy said, I remember specifically, he said, well, that's on the parents. All you have to do, and I love that thing, all you have to do is get it clear to the teenager. I don't know if that's kind of an oxymoron. Clear to the teenager. Make the teenager understand clearly that, if you do X, Y, and Z, there will be consequences, right? A, B, C, right? Just make clear. make it clear, right? You can make, if you're a teenager, teenager, have a teenager, I have students, their teenagers are just beyond the teen years. Yeah, I make things clear all the time. And do it again and again, maybe 5, 10 times or more. And it just doesn't sink in, right? So making the mom 100% responsible, bit of a push, or, going into the extreme, putting her in prison I think she could be in prison for involuntary manslaughter for like 5 to 7 years. Yeah, that's a bit harsh. So that I don't know what the courts did, but hopefully they did something right there, right? Anyways, that's it. So there you go. Critical thinking in social media, but more importantly, critical thinking on the job. And some of our most important decisions, and by some of our most important members of society. Political decisions, engineering decisions. You mess up how buildings are built or planes are built. You're talking about the lives of people, injuring, killing people. Doctors, got to be good critical thinking. Lawyers, right? So this skill, especially as you get into positions that are of more greater responsibility and important impact on society, you're going to make more money, but you're also going to have a lot more responsibility. Anyways, so that's it.